Well, hello and welcome to History Hangout at the Shippensburg Historical Society. My name is John Miller. I'm the executive director here, and today we're just going to kind of briefly go over some of the popular styles of men's headwear during the Victorian era. The Victorian era pretty much covers the time period between the 1830s just to the turn of the century going into the 1900s. And when you're thinking of men's headgear as far as what they would have worn, it depends on your trade, day to day, as far as what day it would be if you were going to church or if you're going to hang out with friends. So your day-to-day activities would cover that, as well as your social status regarding if you're wealthy or somewhat wealthy, or maybe perhaps that you're really poor. So we're going to go ahead and look at the mechanic's cap here real quick, because these caps here, I know when I look at Civil War reenacting, in particular with a lot of the civilian activities, the mechanic's hat is kind of absent from their impressions, which is kind of sad, because I think the mechanic's hat, or what they would refer to as a wheel cap, a lot of these are very interesting and underrepresented types of headgear. So down here with the guy with the overalls, you can see he has a style of the mechanic's hat. This guy here also is sporting one. This guy here is sporting more along the lines of what I would call like the popular wheel cap. And the mechanic caps, think of them as caps that you would wear for a trade. Maybe you're inside of a industry that has a lot of machinery and you don't want to wear a big wide brimmed hat, or maybe you're working in smaller places that the wide brim hat just would not work. Maybe you're a blacksmith and these would be more comfortable types of headgear for you to wear. So when you go and look at like different occupational photographs of the Civil War period, you do see a lot of these styles of mechanic or wheel caps coming up. And like I said, they're just an alternative wear that the male could have for his trade, rather than wearing a slouch hat or a wide brim hat. Here we have a couple examples of straw hats. Straw hats would be more popular to be worn in the summertime because of the fact they're a lot cooler to wear, and they're not as heavy to wear as some of the wool felt or even some of the fur hats. These guys here are just wearing a perfect example of the straw hat that has kind of like a mid-level crown to it, not a very wide brim. This guy here is interesting because he's wearing a straw hat that's pretty much in shape of a top hat. And then these guys here are also sporting what they would call beehive style straw hats. And these would have been perfectly fine for farmers to wear while they're working in the fields, whether they be planting or even harvesting. Then you run into the common hats, and like I said, hat styles, it all depends on the wearer as well as their social status as far as what they can afford. So here we have an excellent photograph that was actually taken here in Pennsylvania, and these are the 3 Confederate prisoners from North Carolina taken at Gettysburg. And this gentleman here is sporting a style beehive hat, which is a very popular farmer style hat. You saw that with the straw hat on the previous slide. Well, this one here is pretty much, it's made from wool felt. The other 2 guys are sporting also another style of wide brim hat. Here we have a much lower crown hat, much smaller brim to it. I'm not going to call that the pork pie style hat, but it's kind of similar. Top hats were very popular. So if you were a Shippensburg native during this time period of American history, I could pretty much see a lot of straw hats being worn, several of the mechanic hats being worn, but I also see all these examples being worn here in town as well, as far as the male population. Same way with these 2 guys here. But then when you're starting to get out to the Midwest or the areas where it's much hotter in the summertime, you start seeing more of these wide brim hats being worn. And the brimmed hats are very important because, for an example, during the Civil War, when they issued out kepis in the Southern Army or forged caps in the Northern Army, you didn't have that wide brim to protect your shoulders and your neck from the elements of the sun, elements from the rain, maybe if it's snowing outside. So a lot of the soldiers in both Union and the Confederate armies, they would always, in several cases, not always, but in several cases, they would try to get a hold of some type of a brimmed hat because of that purpose for protection. And that's what you're seeing these guys here doing. I love the fact that you have the rifle back here, and then these guys here are holding a stick of the fish that they have caught. So they pretty much were out hunting and doing some recreational activities. Here's another couple photographs of the common hat. Here you have a much more taller crown of the beehive style. These guys here are also wearing popular styles of hats. Keep in mind this is going more into like the 1870s and 1880s, but for the most part the styles of hats are pretty much staying the same. People often say that they're wearing cowboy hats. They're not cowboy hats. Cowboy hats is more of a modern term. They're still wearing basically the common hats of the period. Stetson obviously would be getting his start in the 1870s with his Boss of the Plains style hat, which is kind of similar to what this guy's wearing, and possibly these two guys here. Again, if you're a Shippensburg citizen, the derby or the bowler style hat would be really popular among men here. Very large brim, but a very small crown hat on Wild Bill Hickok here. That pretty much is like a personal preference. I don't think that that would have been real popular to wear around the Shippensburg area. But then the hat that Jesse James is wearing here, very low brimmed, also very small or low crown to it. That would have been kind of a popular hat too. And one thing that's to note, and you've probably seen it on some of the other slides here, but how these men who were wearing hats were basically personalized the hats to make them look good on themselves, whether they be wearing them kind of half cocked, like what this guy here is wearing, or just reshaping it kind of like what the James boy here did. And then you have some of these other hats here. Those would have been more popular kind of going into like the 1840s and 1850s. Slouch hats is like this. Sometimes they're made out of silk. That would be for your fancier class. But some of them would have been made out of fur as well as wool felt. This one here, I'm pretty sure that that's a wool felt hat. I don't think that's fur. Then you had painted cloth hats. And painted cloth hats, again, they're kind of like the mechanic or the wheel caps. Very popular, waterproofed, so if it rains, the rainwater will not soak through. You see one being worn by this gentleman here. This gentleman here is sporting also a painted cloth hat. And then this gentleman down here, he actually has a cap protector that's made out of painted cloth. Sometimes you can see rubberized goods being worn by these guys as early as like the 1850s. So if it was like raining or if you were aboard a ship, you know, sometimes you can see the rubberized hats that would be worn by those men. And the reason you can tell that these are all painted cloth, you can kind of see the reflections of the light in the studio. Possibly when the camera took their tintype or their photograph. I could not find any examples of knitted hats from the mid 1800s, but I know they exist. Knitted caps, think of a modern term like a stocking cap. That shape, that size pretty much goes back hundreds of years. And you can kind of see that in this painting here. And here's a close-up of just a style of what we would classify as a knitted hat. So those would be worn particularly in cold areas or during the cold winter months. And then I want to throw some of these in here because these were really interesting. These are advertisements from different catalogs in the mid 1800s all the way up to the late 1800s. So here we have the style for boys, like the boys Joel or the Putnam, made out of fine wool. And you can kind of see where the prices start at like $9, $10.50. That just depends on the size of the hat. Then you get into like the standard and fancy, like the Coleman, and you can see where they have the prices for fur as well as for wool. These are just really interesting because they kind of show you the different shapes and sizes as well as the names for the various companies that would have made hats. Here you got like the planter hat that would be perfect for farming. So those hats there could be made out of wool, fur. They can also be made out of straw. And then just the different style hats right here. You know, these would be for like the GAR, so it's a post-Civil War. Silk hats. Men's crushers. These are made out of wool. General Robert E. Lee had a hat that was similar to this that would be classified as a crushable, but it was more of a it was a knitted hat, and from my understanding he didn't like it, so he never wore it. Here again you have advertisements for silk hats at $5. The derby bowler hair, this is known as the Boston style. You got golf caps, yacht caps, sailor straw hats. So just all kinds of different examples of style of headgear. This page down here, this is for the different styles that this company sold for young men. And then once you get over here, and this is from the 1870, you can see the different styles of hats that are becoming popular, such as Prince Erie or France, standard everywhere, half soft, which basically means it's not fully hard like this, but it's a little bit softer, but not exactly a crushable. So a lot of different styles, and of course you can see the different prices for them. So with that being said, if you were living in the mid 1800s, what style hat would you wear? Would it be more of a derby style, or would it be more of a wide brim style? You know, hats often make the person as far as what their style is, and for me personally, I like more of the stiffer brim that's more flat and not necessarily turned up. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this little presentation of History Hangout, and we'll see you next time.